Well, I was born into a family with everyone that my father associated with were musicians. He's a professional musician. My mom was a singer. So we were encouraged to be musicians. And at an early age, it was kind of mandatory that we all take piano. So I was interested in drums at the same time. So my dad's drummer's drum kit was set up in the living room. And I just remember probably being 4 or 5 and just taking a drumstick and hitting it. And it sounded amazing. I was good. I was good as a pro. And that was sort of my introduction. And I just remember it was a sparkle blue snare drum, and it was something I never forgot. But I was forced to take piano, but my father had drums, and then my older brothers had bands, so there were drums in the house. So I was encouraged by some of their drummers to play. And by the time I was 8, my father realized I was serious, so I got a hand-me-down kit from his drummer. And it was what we call now like vintage drum kits from the 30s, which was something I didn't want to keep. But by 10 or 11, I'd been playing so often that he bought me a proper drum kit. And by the time I was 12, I was eligible for drum corps. So drum corps, one of my brother's drummers played in a drum corps, Royal Cavaliers out of California. So I joined that drum corps, and I was the youngest on the drum line in the band, really, 12 years old. And from there, I got probably the harshest and the most rigorous drum training I'd ever had, maybe to date. But my drum instructor often would snap his sticks in my face because he knew I was going to fall behind, just the nature of my strength. And I went to the cymbals once, and that was punishment if you don't keep up, so I never did that again. But he was a Marine Drum Corps instructor, and he was harsh, but he kind of set the line and the bar high for me, and I've always respected that. As time went on, my mother introduced me to Bossa Nova was big in the mid-'60s, so she started giving me records like Brazil 66, or 65, and Jobim and things like that she was interested in. She said, play the drums on these. So that was a challenge from the backbeat Stones and Beatles stuff. And my father, around that same time, gave me a Dave Brubeck Quartet album. And I was introduced to odd time signatures, which I found fascinating. So that kind of set me up to play jazz and fusion. So I started doing that as early as junior high. And I always would audition for the drummer for the jazz band and get it. And so I remained doing that in middle school, or rather junior high it was called, and then high school. And then I sort of would take over the drum line in every high school or college that I went to because I had the most knowledge and I had all these cadences memorized. So as time went on, I was looking for more and more challenging things. And I started playing jazz. And when I was 19, I did a couple just California West Coast tours, and it didn't pay much, and people weren't paying much attention. So it was kind of discouraging. But I was doing it. I was right out of high school, and I was like, I'm a professional musician. And at that point, one of my friends was playing in a punk band, and I thought, this is now 77, 76, end of 76. And he wasn't playing in a punk band. He introduced me to a record, the Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks. That's, I guess, the end of 76 is when I heard it. I believe it was. But I thought it was hilarious, and I thought I'd form a punk band, my brother and I, and we'd call it Spit. And that never panned out, but we wrote a bunch of songs. And then when I got an offer to audition for this punk band, I thought punk was already over. And I thought, if they got gigs, I'll do it. So they said they had a gig right away in San Francisco. So I liked that word, and so I auditioned and got the spot, and it was fun. It was like funny, humorous stuff, super high energy. And our first show was Mabuhay Gardens in San Francisco, and we were opening for the Dead Kennedys. Was our first show in San Francisco, my first show with the band. And Dead Kennedys canceled. There was someone in the band was sick, so we had a sellout house to play to in San Francisco. So it was a great introduction to the punk scene for me, and I thought, okay, I'll do this. So that's kind of what I embraced for quite a while. And it was kind of a relief in a way. I was working at a clothing store, and in 77, in 78, it was very like post-disco. You had to have gabardine pants and a nice shirt with a chain, and your hair is coiffed and platforms. And I wasn't buying into all of that, but I worked in a clothing store, so I knew about it. And it was nice joining a punk band and buying all your clothes for work in a thrift store for $1. So it's sort of a change of direction that I didn't expect, that I was kind of relieved to, and nice to be part of this non-superficial, high-energy music that was kind of indignant and kind of flipping the finger off to a lot of the bands like Uriah Heep and Pink Floyd that were low energy, but dinosaurs and very successful at the time. So it's nice to be a part of this movement that was like kind of the antithesis of that. For example, it was the lead singer of Fear was doing like a Don Rickles reverse psychology on people. And I thought that was hilarious because every other band kind of kissed the butt of the audience and told them how much they appreciated them being there. And Fear kind of did just the opposite. And it worked. It was a entertaining thing to do for quite a while. And I did that till 93. And at that point, I decided I didn't want to work with the singer anymore. I had moved to New York in 92 from Los Angeles and found work, plenty of work, and made a lot of money teaching music software and doing music for little documentaries, little independent things. And I worked in a music store for a while, and that kind of introduced me to all the key players in New York City, which I ended up being their teacher to the music software. The books were like that thick for like Pro Tools or Logic Audios, the software that I was using. And no one had the patience to sit and read these books from front to back. And I knew I could make money if I did. So as boring as it was, I actually learned these software. And then started working for the manufacturers at trade shows and kind of became the name amongst Apple. They offered me some work, which I turned them down. And was totally happy and successful in New York City from 92 to 2005 when I thought the economy was going to drop out, and decided to move to Portland at that point before all my money went flying away, as it did 9/11. I was in New York City during 9/11, and working for yourself was really, really rough. I ended up selling gear to survive, and my daughter was born in 2003, so in 2005 I did not want to be in that situation again with a kid. So I had enough money to move to Portland, and I didn't know what I'd do here. I figured I'd pick up the pieces as I did when I first moved to New York, and found work here and made ends meet. But I'd say early on, just to mention, when I was 12, that was a year where I kind of had to make a decision. I was really in middle school. I was really into architecture and drafting. It was like my love amongst music, all instruments. But my uncle, my dad's brother, was a very, very famous architect, Richard Leitch. He had designed like all of Westlake Village in Los Angeles and the French Riviera and Acapulco. He did massive housing things. And he asked me if I wanted to intern when I was 12. And so I had to make the decision, do I want to play drums or do I want to be an architect? And at 12 years old, I made that decision. And financially, it wasn't the wisest, but it made me happy. And to this day, it's like I don't regret that decision at all. And since doing that, it's giving me my conviction where I can do any job if I need to. As many artists we do, we have to support ourselves with one or two jobs. And even when you're successful, there's periods of time where your paycheck relies on your sales for the prior year, your quarterly sales for the prior year. And if you don't do well that year, you've got to pick up the pieces. So I've kind of always been resourceful. I've been a tailor. I've driven transportation. I've worked on other movie crews throughout the years. Managed a music store in Times Square. And as I came to Portland, I hadn't really taught drums before. I taught just one or two students the whole time I was living in New York City, and never while I was in Los Angeles. But I thought I have many, many years of teaching experience, teaching music software. So I thought this is something I love, and I know how I learn these beats and how essential some of these exercises are to bring you up to the level that I'm at. So I started teaching, first with my drum corps exercises modified for drum kit, and then I started writing my own exercises. And the more I did this, the more I played, and I found myself playing, having moved to Portland, more than I'd ever played. I was playing 4 to 6 hours a day, so my chops started rising in a way they'd never had, and using my left hand as a leading hand is something I hadn't done full time. So my students kind of pushed me because I needed new exercises constantly. I couldn't recycle old ones, really. I mean, somewhat, but I really it forced me to write. And I've written music. I'm a composer, and so to write drum beats was natural to me. So writing these exercises made my chops come up in a place that I never felt them, and my speed and my precision was probably not as, maybe in drum corps, but it was when you're 12, 13 years old, you're in a different mindset. Whereas as you become an adult, I think you focus on things, you don't put anything on the back burner as you do when you're younger, I think. You address things that you want to address. So I found myself addressing all these weaknesses in my own playing that I really hadn't thought about as weaknesses before. It was just like, I'm good, I don't need to do that. But having started teaching, which I recommend anyone that wants to learn something, teach it, because it forces you to stay ahead of your students. Therefore, you're constantly learning. And as I'm writing exercises for those students, I'm constantly writing. And then I've got to learn them. And then I've got to memorize them. So I'm constantly using both sides of my brain. Drums is an ambidextrous instrument. So with that, I could qualify when a drummer comes to me and starts playing something, I can spot his or her weaknesses right away. And therefore, when I start building on those exercises that they've never felt before, they feel it too. So they get that joy that I got when I was first doing things that I really had wanted to do, but didn't really get to until I started teaching. So that kind of brought me into a place where now I could do anything I wanted. It was kind of a way to prove to myself, oh, if I could learn this, then my brain is sharp enough to learn anything. And it's like been a way that I can count on myself for resources. And when COVID hit, for instance, I didn't know what I was going to do. I taught drums 6 days a week, and I performed nationally and locally and had no work. I didn't know what to do, but I saw Amazon trucks driving around. So I called Amazon. They gave me a job driving, and I hadn't really driven professionally for, 40 years. But I did it, and it's knowing my brain works, knowing I could learn new things, and I wasn't afraid of it. So I did that for a while, and the 12-hour days and micromanagement drove me crazy. So I stopped doing that and just looked for other things. So I haven't been afraid to roll up my sleeves, and my ego's not in it where I feel like, oh, that's below me at all. I feel like, hey, this is keeping food on my table and keeping me independent. So I've looked at it as a benefit that I can call on myself. And I think a lot of artists do that as well. I think a lot of us have to be resourceful. You've got to have a job as a bartender or whatever. You've got to be resourceful and not afraid of that, and not looking at it as a deterrent to what you love doing, but not looking at it as not restricting yourself for your happiness on your instrument to be certain conditions. The happiness is doing what you love to do with the excitement that you love doing, and that never goes away. Whether it's in a jam situation or writing or band situation, those are the things I look forward to. I don't need an audience. It's nice. Fear plays in front of tens of thousands of people. We did Surf Blitz 2 summers ago. It was like 30,000 people. And it doesn't really matter. It's the front row I'm playing for. But my point is getting the satisfaction of playing my craft, whether it's in a sports bar playing Sweet Home Alabama, or playing with my original band, local band, Nasal Rod, playing something that I wrote with the band, something that's brand new from the present. They both have sort of a rewarding feeling because they're both my craft. And I think once you find a craft, and I think I found it at 12, is why I wanted to go back to that 12, because it was a decision that I lived through every day. And it's one I'm glad I made. But I think my father encouraged me too. My father's a professional musician, and having 5 kids, he had to be resourceful too. I'm sure there was things he did that maybe he didn't really think of as part of his craft, but he had to do in order to support a family. And that sort of, I can do it, I can do whatever needs to get done, was something my father kind of set the bar for all of my brothers and I, whether it's building a cabin from the foundation up or fixing TVs or whatever. He just had this attitude of like, I can fix this in a good way. And he's handed it down to, I think, to everyone in my family. I fixed my dryer recently. I just took it apart, figuring like what could be wrong. And I found some parts that need to get torn out and sewing some more. I was a tailor for 6 years, so I love sewing machines and machines, period. I build muscle cars, and one of my hobbies is restoring antique slot machines from the 30s and 40s. So it's that same sort of, I can do it, I can fix it, until I can't, but I go in there with a positive attitude. I think the drum, like Dave Brubeck's drummer, Joe Morello, was a very, very strong influence early on because he was playing in odd time signatures with aplomb. He had no problem going from one time signature to another. Revisiting my introduction to Dave Brubeck Quartet was jazz, and it was post bebop, so there was some swing to the early jazz I was listening to, but I really was interested in the odd time signatures of Dave Brubeck, and that sort of that drummer, Joe Morello, became a big influence, and it still is. I still love his books, and I still emulate his exercises and beats. But the Latin drummers on like Airto, some of the drummers coming out of Brazil fascinated me too because they were so fast, but it wasn't even their speed that interested me. It was the excitement they were doing, and it wasn't a standard beat that us Westerners were so accustomed to. It was something different, so it was way more challenging. Drummers like Buddy Rich didn't really impress me. They seemed to be all words and no sentences, where drummers like Steve Gadd and some other, I'd say late 60s, 70s jazz drummers were doing what I wanted to do, and I sort of wanted to join that scene. But I sort of was sidetracked because I was playing jazz for like $20 a night. This is like 1975, 76. And it was like, that's what I went to school for. And it seemed like the audience had their backs to me drinking their martinis. And so when I got the Fear audition and I did the first Fear gig, it sort of opened me up to this really exciting scene where the audience was as entertaining as the band. And it sort of attracted the people that didn't fit in the discos, the people that didn't fit in the metal shows and the heavy metal, as it was called then. They sort of, or if they liked heavy metal, they liked the energy of like the punk music, but they didn't really understand it. They just were new to it. So Fear had an entertaining way of keeping people interested and staying by insulting them and telling them they had long hair and they were gay, and that, of course, infuriated some of these people who were AC/DC fans, and they would spit and flip the band off, and then the next time you'd see them, they'd have their T-shirt with the sleeves cut off and their hair sheared off, and they'd acting like they'd shot up speed or something, because what they came in and saw was very intimidating. And I saw the same thing. I was going to early punk shows in Hollywood, the Mask off Cherokee in Hollywood. This is 78, early 78. Those bands like the Controllers and the Weirdos and Screamers that were like really high energy, but totally original. They weren't trying to emulate. They weren't trying to be commercial. They were just making art. And they were fascinating. And it's like, I remember the Controllers, Carla Mad Dog, the drummer, was kind of a tall, skinny black girl. I think she has MS now, but really awesome and sweet person. But super high energy, just giving 200%. And I didn't see that. I saw rock drummers, you could practically smoke and have one hand tied behind your back, and like Carla's giving it up. And then KK from the Screamers, all these bands had drummers that were giving more than anyone else on any other genre. And the audience was interested, and the early days, 78 wasn't yet slam dancing. It was just pogoing, which is my friends and I having a beer, bumping into each other. And people saw us bumping into each other, and they thought we didn't know each other. So they were kind of intimidated. So it took some of those people a while to figure out what the kind of rules were. And then as the scene became bigger and bigger, more and more people just took it on their own to fight, to use that venue as a place to take out their aggressions. And that's when I got punched in the face at one of the mask shows on Santa Monica. I was like, all right, I'm not going in the pit anymore. And then it was like, there was rules. People knew each other, and they were looking out for each other. But some people came in not realizing that was there was rules and people knew, and they would just cause trouble. So there was fights in the pit. And then it was attracting skinheads, which were people sig heiling the band. So it was like people thought that was okay, because it was like, where do we fit in? We don't fit in the disco scene. We don't fit in the metal scene. Maybe we fit in the punk scene. Hey, no one's kicking us out. So that contingency was there. There was a lot of contingencies of, I wouldn't say misfits, but it's just people that just didn't jive with the commercial clubs that were being offered otherwise. And the punk shows offered, to some people it offered chaos, but other people it offered originality and high energy, and that's what I saw out of it. I didn't see it as a negative force. I saw it as kind of the bad boys, Sid Vicious wearing a swastika. I didn't think he was an anti-Semite. It was like, that's the bad boys, the G.I. Joes I played with. The German guys had the cool uniforms. I wasn't, a Nazi, and yet it attracted those people. And those shows, like I remember a show in San Diego, the Skeleton Club. These guys came backstage, and they gave me a big pile of pamphlets, and they asked me to hand them out. And I looked at them, and they were white supremacist pamphlets. So I just said, everyone out of the dressing room, band meeting, sorry guys, got to kick everyone out. And of course, as soon as they left, I chucked them in the trash. So there's that element we had to contend with. And still, I think in 93, we were playing a show, and some person from the KKK came out and asked if we'd play their rally in Oklahoma City. And it's like, it's not something I was really interested in doing, but it's like, why do they think that's okay? It's like, what have we done? It's like, I designed a Fear logo that had one F going this way and one going that. But if you tilt it, it looks like a swastika. So they made that assumption that we were Nazis. So those are the kind of bad elements, I think, that, not to them, but they were bad elements to me that wasn't really musical. It wasn't really creative. It was really just a negative element that they found attractive. They found the negative element amongst Fear shows, at least, to be attractive, thinking they'd be accepted there. And they weren't necessarily getting kicked out. They were paying customers until they started fights. But it's just one of those elements that you forget about. And it's people also kind of nostalgize about those early days of punk, but just looking different in those days. The general public was really frightened. They thought it was the closest thing they could relate to is the Hells Angels or Clockwork Orange. They thought that's what it was. They had no other reference points. So here they see me. I'm a pretty easygoing musician, but I had a leather jacket and motorcycle boots, and maybe my face had some soot from putting wood in the fire. And I'd get, yes, sir, whatever you want, sir. And I was like, why is everyone being so nice to me? And it was years later when I finally realized people weren't turning around looking at me to see if I was stealing or what I was doing, that I realized, oh, it's become accepted. And then Nordstrom's had kind of like Cockney plaid skirts and, net stuff. And it was like, oh, you can buy hardcore punk clothes at Nordstrom's now. So I kind of made full circle. And people started modifying their look so they didn't look so Nordstrom's. But it's sort of... The energy levels, it's hard to describe. Bands like the Dills, when I first saw the Dills, who became Rank and File later, and of course the Ramones, had such high energy. The Ramones would end a song and immediately start another. They just count it off. 2, 3, 4, next song. And the audience I was in the audience. I remember being at the Whiskey. This is probably February 78 or whenever they came through LA. and being exhausted, just jumping around the audience. And I thought, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to make people exhausted. But what ended up happening is when we were writing songs, I'd want them to be as fast as humanly possible. That's where my chops were. And those things became the things that drove people over the top. It just made their heart rates go up, and they didn't know what to do with themselves, and the mosh pit was born. So I was probably around 81. So I was a part of that scene from late 77 to 81, and there really wasn't any mosh pit. But 81, the mosh pit was born, and then it was big. And people, I remember doing a show at Hollywood Palladium. It was about 3,000 people. It was a sold-out show, and seeing a 3,000-person mosh pit. I think I've got a VHS of it somewhere. But it wasn't fighting yet. And by 81, 82, the end of 81, 82, it became kind of dangerous if you don't know who's there or you're not accepted. And but it's still, to this day, it's fascinating when I see shows, live shows, and especially the big festivals, you'll see like 4 or 5 mosh pits. So it's little communities. These guys, kind of like New York City's got their little, it's a village, you know everybody. And it's the same thing with these mosh pits. These people know each other. It looks dangerous, and I'm not minimizing how dangerous potentially could be. But there's a little family. There's people who respect each other, and they want to get their aggressions out. The music is driving them over the top. They want to lock with it. I met John through a friend of John's. John had seen, there's a cable show, I don't know, pre-MTV called New Wave Theater. It was on cable, USA network, prior to MTV, called New Wave Theater. And the host, Peter Ivers, was kind of an androgynous, kind of love-to-hate kind of person. But he was the host of the show. And one part of the show, after we finished playing, he started asking us, what's the meaning of life? And the bass player grabbed him by the underpants and gave him a wedgie. And as he came up, I pushed the top of his body and he went down, and we all pretended like we were beating him up. Well, unbeknownst to us, he had a black belt in karate. He could have killed us. But he's friends with John Belushi. John saw that and was like, I got to meet these guys. So he had no way to contact us. But one of his buddies, Tino Insana, who's another Second City comedian they'd met in Chicago, he was talking to while he was in town, and he told him about seeing this band Fear on New Wave Theater. And Tino's like, I'm taking bass lessons from the bass player. He's like, give me his number. So he called Durf, the bass player, and Durf couldn't make any meeting. So he gave him my number and of course, Lee and Philo's number. So he called me, and he says, this is John Belushi. I want to meet you for drinks. I'm at On the Rocks. I said, all right, I'll be there in 5 minutes. I lived in Culver City. So I went up to meet him, and as he greets me at the door, he starts telling me my jokes and Fear jokes to me. And I'm like, I didn't have a TV. I lived in my rehearsal studio, and I didn't watch movies. I didn't watch TV much. I don't watch TV still. But within, I'd say about 20 minutes of talking to him, he says, you got to do Saturday Night Live. And I just thought it was beer talking. I think I drank 14 beers that night on the Rocks. And I remember Tatum O'Neal was there. There's a couple celebrities, Jack Nicholson, there's a few people there. I was like, oh, this is a pretty fancy place. But I just figured like it was just the alcohol talking, and I'd never see him again. So I went home, figuring I'd never hear from him again. And about 2 weeks later, I get a call from this guy, Eric. And he goes, this is Eric from Rockefeller Center. What type of set would you like built? And I was like, what? And he says, well, you're doing Saturday Night Live on Halloween this year. And I said, oh, yeah, John mentioned that, but he didn't say when. But I'm happy to do it. And I go, maybe an alley scene? If that's, and I hang up and I'm like, okay, we're doing Saturday Night Live. And I had no idea that he was serious. So at that point, some of the other guys met with him too when I wasn't there. And they hung out with him and were in the studio. And he decided to he was doing a movie called Neighbors at the time. That's why he was in LA. And he wanted to put some Fear material on in the movie. So the producers were listening to him. So they said, come up with something. So we kind of, Fear wrote just a basic, really 1-2 chord song for this Neighbors idea. And they gave him production money. So he was using me as a producer, engineer, to work on this stuff. So we cut basic tracks, and then John and I would go into a couple different studios in Los Angeles. And he was paying me like $500 a day. This is 82, which is pretty good money for me. And just hanging out with me all day long. So John and I hung out for, I don't know, a month or so, like every day just about. And just staying up late, eating food, having the chef come in and, from sleep and to feed us. And just it was nice to ride on that little limo ride for a little while. And just to get to know him, because he's just a down-to-earth. He felt like he was a musician trapped in an actor's body. So that's where he had the most joy. He could just be around musicians. There's no ego there. It wasn't about you or me. It was just about love for the art. And he would come to my rehearsal studio in Van Nuys and play drums and sing. He wanted to be Buddy Miles. And that was his biggest joy, was just not being, because at the time he had so many hits with Blues Brothers, with Saturday Night Live. He was hot, a super hot item. He was on so many charts, record things at the same time, but that really didn't matter to him. It just was like, that's where his career took him. And he's incredibly talented, but he's incredibly humble. He would just, one-liner kind of things. He would just do things out of the blue, like, hey, come here, sit on my lap. I'm like, what? He goes, sit on my lap. Like, okay, put your hands behind your back. And now his arms are mine. He starts firing up a cigarette, and he's talking for me, that kind of stuff. Just like funny stuff, but just for like a few people that are in the room. So that's a side of John a lot of people don't know, that he's just a loving, very generous person. And he just was a family man on the East Coast and kind of a party man on the West Coast. I think when he was away from Judy, he kind of was being the little kid, and he was a grown-up when he was on the East Coast, because he really had both elements. He was very, very intelligent, and he knew how to walk the line until he didn't know how. And Bill, his personal trainer, wasn't able to really control his behavior. When he left, John was on his own, and John was party man, and he had an unlimited budget. So he had, access to things that, were not good for him. I mean, I survived. I think I lost the sense of smell, but there was a period of time after I joined Fear where the lead singer started getting work as an actor. And he had never really done that, so he's getting more and more work as an actor. So after our first record came out and we toured, there was sort of a lull. He was acting full-time. I think he was in Clue or Flashdance. There was movies right around that period of time, 82, 83. So we fired our bass player, who was just doing heroin, and none of us knew it. He always had the flu, and we were very muscular. And the punk scene kind of demanded you be athletes. Like the other drummers I was competing against, or at least comparing myself to, were like Robo, who was playing for Black Flag, Don Bowles, who was playing for the Germs and 45 Grave, Cliff Martinez, who's still a good buddy of mine, was playing for the Weirdos, and then Chili Peppers later. But there was a lot of, if I've missed a few, not to minimize them. But my point is, there's a very much of an athleticism in music at that time, and that was fascinating to me. I was always doing lightweight training, and always, a sprinter. I still run. So it was something that interested me. It was taking my musicality to a physical level. I really hadn't needed to go that far before. And that was a fertile ground. And Los Angeles at the time, I'd say in the late 70s, was fertile ground. There was all kinds of new music happening, of all sorts, good and bad. Kind of like Portland. When I moved here in 2005, I felt that same fertile ground. So I got an offer to play with Nina Hagen. Flea, who was playing with Fear for about a year, had written us some songs for Nina. And I guess it was 83 that she asked me to play with her. And I listened to the music, and it wasn't punk, really. There was all sorts of other styles, which I was fine playing. And I gave it 100%, just as I would do anything. And I hadn't worked with someone quite like her before. She's very, very creative, really good energy, very, very happy, just a good person to be around. You know, you can sense people, you know, that you work with that is like, oh, what's this guy's problem, you know? But she didn't, she had just had a transparent vibe to her, and she was very open too about her vulnerabilities and other things that you never saw of her. So I related to her because it was just a non-self experience being around her, who is my favorite people. So we're not bragging who we are, we're just talking about what's happening right now. So it was a good creative environment working with her. I wasn't writing with her, but the guitarist was that I was working with, and Flea had written with her, so these are close friends of mine that where I was playing their songs. So I was comfortable playing all these things. We were playing festivals all over Germany. We played, one of my favorites is playing in the Walterbühne in Berlin, where the Olympics took place in '33, and this man gave his speeches, as that's what they say there, this man. And it was fascinating because the acoustics were perfect. I remember hitting my kick drum and it was like perfect dispersion. It was like, who made this place? You know, it's like, this man. But, you know, it came to an end. Unfortunately, the bass player in that band had some cocaine problems, and it was manifesting in a horrible way that no one could stand. And eventually, I was the first to quit. And then everyone else disbanded that band. The No Problem Orchestra didn't have any problems except for the bass player, who was band leader, unfortunately. So that, unfortunately, it came to a crashing end, and I had to make excuses to get out because they wouldn't accept the fact that I was backing out. They assumed that I was a racist because the bass player was black, but he was just a paranoid person. But it was fascinating, and I loved Germany. I lived in Charlottenburg while I was there on the Kudamm for a while, but it was very expensive. But I love the Germans. That kind of introduced me to German food, German culture, and German people who are fascinating. Being an American, kind of in a sheltered musician's world, and meeting just strangers in Germany, I found them very, very well versed in what's going on in the world, and they educated me to things that I had no idea. So, an awesome beer. You can't have bad beer there. So I loved it. I loved being there the whole time, and of course, working under Nina gave me some prestige I hadn't had. But as it ended, I came back and Fear decided to write new material. So we hired a new bass player, which was Laurie from the Dickies, who were friends with the Dickies. So Laurie came in, started playing with Fear, and that gave us the opportunity to write new material, to have a real bass player again. So the More Beer record was built after we hired Laurie, and then we actually were able to go out and tour once we made that record. But that was kind of short-lived. I'd say by 86, 87, Lee was doing acting full-time again, and everyone in the band was doing his own project. I had my band, The Loom. Viola guitarist had his band, Mbutangawa. Lorenzo had his own band too, which I played in sometimes. So we kind of it started dispersing for a while. And it wasn't until just the demand got so high and the offers from promoters got to the point where we're getting offered, 5 figures for the first time. And so we started working again in '91. And by that point, Laurie had left the band. We brought in Will McGregor. And we worked for a few years, for 2 years with that lineup. And at that point, I just couldn't work with Lee anymore. It's just, he became so obstreperous and just resistant to anything that anyone in the band suggested other than he. We'd have songs on the playlist and on rehearsal, and they wouldn't end up on the set. And that reminds me, it's like when Flea was in the band, the same thing that was happening. It kind of drove Flea out of the band. Flea and I were writing material, and we were rehearsing it, and then it would come to the show, and none of our songs were on the set list. So Flea and I were pissed. And at the time, I was producing this reggae singer called Boo Berry in a studio. I had gotten blocked out time and cheap 2-inch place on Hollywood Boulevard in Western called Studio 9. And so I knew the studio and I knew the people who ran it, so I knew I could get block time. So Flea had this band, and it wasn't called Chili Peppers at the time. And I remember going to rehearsals and just being blown away what they were doing. So as they started doing shows and became actual Chili Peppers, I would just go to their shows because Flea and I were off usually the same night, and I do their sound and light. So I was totally digging this hardcore. And Hillel was doing like Middle Eastern funk. It was because he was born in Israel. And I thought it was completely original, and it was just super high energy. Jack Irons was like playing original beats. It was just fascinating to me. So I said, why don't we go in Studio 9 and cut some music? I can block the whole day out. So I did, and I cut them pretty much on first takes. I just had them get sounds on things other than what we were going to record so I could capture that first take. And I did that pretty much. And I was really pleased with my work. The idea was use it as a demo tape. So I remember mastering very bright for cassette tapes because in your car, it sounded muddy if you didn't have the Dolby decoded or a bunch of treble on it. So I'd written it for cassette, I mastered for cassette tape. And it was years later, it was like 84, I was working with Steve Schiff and Keith Forsey. And Keith said, I've got the best Chili Peppers stuff ever recorded. And so he puts it on. I see it's one of my white tapes. I'm like, no, it can't be. He just came from England. So he puts the tape on, and I'm listening to it. And it wasn't until they got to an a cappella section where I had them all in a hallway with like 100 feet of XLR cable that I could hear in between their words when the compressor came up in between their vocals with a big hum. It's like, that's my recording. So Keith gave me props because he's a very well-known producer for recording. He thinks what's still their best recordings. And that record's on EMI called Out in LA, those demo sessions still. But that was a blast working with those guys. And Flea just recontacted me recently, so I'm still on the radar with those guys. I guess punk sort of laid out some rules early on. One of the big rules was downstrokes. The Ramones kind of set the bar for that one, I thought. And just the sound of that downstroke and palm muted, you could hear air in between every note. As Ramones set the bar got lifted and it became more difficult to play that. And that right up to metal is about as fast as you can go. Then they decided to not downstroke and go digga, 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 so they go faster. But up to that point, the energy really was the prerequisite when you're writing punk. I mean, obviously there's songs like Baby, Baby, Baby from the Vibrators that is not punk, but that was their biggest hit. There's bands that wanted to cross over, Blondie's doing disco or The Clash doing Rock the Casbah kind of stuff. At the time, people wanted to make money, whereas bands like Fear, they didn't care. It wasn't about making money. It was about meeting this energy level and then an attitude, and with lyrics that are so over the top that they're funny. And now looking back, some of those songs are pretty gross and pretty misogynistic even. But at the time, in 78, Hillside Stranglers were out. The Bianchi and his cousin, and Richard Ramirez. These were actual serial murders, and the Crips and the Bloods were killing people in my neighborhood. I came home one night looking for my girlfriend, and when she wasn't there, I went to look into the bloody sheet out on my street that the police were surrounding. So it was a grim time. So the punk music was kind of like trying to disperse some of that, I think, whether consciously or not. But the energy level from the punk was kind of the bar that was set. So if you were playing chinky, 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 you weren't really punk. That kind of separated the men from the boys. So that was something that a lot of the hardcore bands kind of looked at, and they kind of made it their goal to write stuff that was fast. And it's like myself, I was just writing bar chords, the stuff that I would write. I'm not really a guitarist, but I play bar chords. So I could write punk songs. It's kind of like early Who. It was just bar chords, but it was super fast energy. So it kind of let maybe professional guitarists into the writing because they could have an attitude and they could hammer out some bar chords and be accepted as like, that's perfect. They weren't playing major sevens and they weren't playing bebop. It's like there was things they were not doing that made it okay to do. But the energy level was something that was so refreshing for so many people. Like I say, those songs like Urgent, So Urgent, these songs that were on the radio. And then, of course, being alive back then, we had all the leftovers from the 50s and 40s being blasted on the radio still in rotation. So all this saccharine music was being bombarded by us. So this was like necessary for us to wash this horrible saccharine out of our palates, and something that's like, okay, this is like vinegar, and in comparison. And it was like, I like vinegar, It became something, kind of a badge of honor. And the more you did it, the more you accepted it, and the more you look for kind of kindred spirits amongst other bands. So you find yourself giving props to people that are doing it, and they know that you're doing it. And that's what I was saying, that little kind of like, not rivalry, but it's kind of a positive reinforcement that you got from other drummers that gave up as much as you did. And then other people as well. Like Keith Morris from Circle Jerks used to come to my shows, and he knew that I didn't drink or smoke or doing anything before a show. But he knew I liked to drink beer. We used to have a little gang called Bud Club that we'd go out on Tuesday nights, Greg and Lee and Keith and I, sometimes Philo. But it was like a drinking buddies. So we enjoyed drinking, but Keith would be there at the end of a set with an ice cold beer, handing it to me as I'm walking off my last encore. And he did that for so many shows that he was just showing his appreciation of what I was giving. So it was at all levels, not just drummers to drummers, but it was like guitarists or bass players giving you props as well, and vice versa. So it was a nice complimentary scene to be a part of. A lot of people didn't see that. They just saw the onslaught on stage, and they thought we were the persona that we're presenting, which was fine. It was funny to hear people buy into that, because it was the entertaining value of the kind of mystery. Are they gay? I was like, why are they always bagging on gay people? It's like, or whatever, whatever. Are they really like that? And maybe there's a little bit of that in Lee, but he does have a heart. But his persona on stage was no heart at all. It's very, but humorous. And like I say, he did something that it really hadn't been done since Don Rickles, where he took that negative attitude towards the audience, which was unexpected, in those scenes. Because bands like X, who we'd opened for, would say, we can't play with you guys. Your audience is too crazy. And it's like, we just riled up their audience. It wasn't our audience, now it is. But there was sort of a separation amongst some bands that didn't want to be a part of the violent aspect, which was just a consequence of we weren't intentionally causing the violence. It was just what I was saying. People were dying for something that wasn't a funeral dirge. Well, I think the difference is the musicality. Lee started playing guitar at a really early age. He also started singing at a real early age. And to this day, he's 75, and his vocal chops are still amazing. So I come from a jazz fusion, bossa nova. I come from a very eclectic background. So I couldn't be satisfied with just playing boom, bop, boom, bop. Sometimes that's what you need to do. But any opportunity I could, I drop in something original beats. So the musicality kind of took off in a way from the early punk songs like I Love Living in the City to our early set lists. And because Philo, the guitarist, is a mathematician, he has no problem thinking in odd time signatures. And that's my roots. I love odd time signatures, and I like to make them groove. And I can go from any time signature to any time signature. When I was 16, I played with Don Ellis and Ralph Humphreys. And some of those time signatures were 33-16, I think, one of these songs. Final Analysis, I forget the song. But so I love making an odd time signature groove. So that was something really no one had done. The Minutemen later started doing some proggy kind of stuff, some fast, high-energy proggy stuff. But there wasn't a lot of bands really going out of the safe zone of punk, whereas we were, had our feet solid on the ground. We knew what punk was. We knew what the rules were. But we also took those chances. So those same sort of attitudes of straight-ahead boom bop punk songs we're putting into odd time signatures, like We Destroy the Family is still a punk song. Kill your mother and father, steal the money from your mother, father, buy a gun. Those things were funny. I mean, not to parents at the time, but they also had this, and that's one of the hardest Fear songs I play, because it's basically 30-second notes from top to bottom. But it was to be able to do that and then listen back to a little recording of yourself or a live show and hear yourself do it. It was like, yes, I did what I set out to do. And it's just that saving yourself too. A lot of artists, a lot of singers would have to do heroin or blow before they performed. And Fear was always, very, very straight edge. And we got mistaken for straight edge. I think that Lee and the singer probably drank a little bit before our shows, but not I. And it's like I kind of made that like an athlete. I want to have a bunch of beers before I go on a marathon or smoke weed or anything. I just saved myself for that performance, and because it was so much was on the line. All those people that you're representing and are checking you out are going to know whether you're fucking up tonight or not. And it's like that didn't happen because of that respect for those other musicians who were usually in the crowd. I think it was songs. I mean, the second record was cut in 2 days and mixed. I mixed the first the More Beer mix. I just remixed it, which I was happy to get a few weeks to do it. And now I'll put my name on it now. But that first record we cut one day, overdubbed second day, and I mixed in 2 hours thinking I was doing board mixes. And then Lee's like, that's good. Let's release it. And I like, don't put my name on that. But the energy level at that time, we had just gotten Lorenzo. We'd written all these new songs. I just bought, before I left for Europe with Nina, I bought a Simmons kit, which a Simmons kit is those octagon black, or they're all different colors, but they're electronic and not digital. It's an analog, like a Moog or something, but it's a drum. So I could finally turn up louder than the bass player or guitarist, which I love because the drummers standing next to stacks are lost. So I could finally hear myself. So that was a record that I wanted to put that drum kit on. I was really excited about at the time. Van Halen just recorded a record with the same drum kit. So it was a given. It's like, this is what drummers are doing right now. So it's sort of the new toy. It's kind of like we drummers buy new snares all the time or cymbals. It's kind of the same thing. It was like, okay, I've got an awesome acoustic kit. I want to incorporate this electronic. So that was one motivation of going in the studio and doing something exciting. Of course, the new material was exciting. It's always the lifeblood of any band when you have new material. So it was exciting to go in, having played this stuff live, to actually record it, because we were well rehearsed, and actually get it on tape was kind of a nice accumulation of losing a bass player, hiring another one, losing that bass player, starting over, and writing new material. So 85 was that year. 85 was the year where we kind of like picked up the pieces again and successfully took off and worked behind that record till I quit in 93. Well, in 92, I moved to New York City. My car got stolen, my marriage ended, I had my own band, The Loom, failed record contracts, so I was like writing my own material, producing it, band leading, and that was really rough. And then I didn't get signed. I sat in front of some presidents of some labels, but they didn't know what to do with it. This is prior to Graceland coming out in 86. So in that period of time, I was kind of discouraged. So by 92, we had just played New York City in 91, I think. So I met a few people, and I got some offers. There was a recording studio that said they'd hire me, and I was interested in that because I was really doing movie crew work quite a bit. From 82 to 92, I really was working on crews. I'd take off to do a tour or a project and jump back on the next movie or next project. So it was a good way for me to keep my bills paid. But by 92, I just needed a change. It was maybe kind of a rite of passing for me, too. I really hadn't left all my safe and secure system where I grew up in Los Angeles. So I moved to New York, and everyone told me, you're going to fall on your face. You can't make money. And I was still working with Fear, so I was on the road. And when I came off the road and I decided not to work with Lee anymore, I didn't know what I'd do. So I started working on a recording studio, and I was learning software, digital audio for the first time, because in Los Angeles, the people that I was I knew and some of my older brother's friends were kind of giving me the cold shoulder on information. I'd ask, what is optical? And they're like, that's where you store things. That doesn't tell me, it's like there was these brick walls I was hitting. These people did not want to tell me what they were doing with digital audio, and it was sort of the new media. So I was really interested. So moving to New York, first thing I did is I worked at a recording studio, learned sonic solutions. And I wasn't satisfied there because it was basically cleaning up Chinese food and tips and stuff. And I wasn't what I wanted to do. So when I came off a tour in the end of 92, I looked into taking Pro Tools lessons. At the time, it was called Sound Tools, and it was sound designer, DigiDesign, pre-Avid. So I took a class. It was $100 an hour. Remember this in '92, and one of the guys in the class, this guy Jonathan Pearl, told me he's like, "Are you paying $100 an hour?" I'm like, "Yeah." "How are you doing it?" He's like, "I work at Sam Ash next door." I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "If you work at Sam Ash, you get it for free." And I'm like, "How do I get a job at Sam Ash?" So I did it. I got a job, and I'd worked retail out of high school. So I didn't think I'd do well. And even the general manager says, you're not going to make that much money here. And I started making really good money. Just my knowledge of the software, because I'd been using Performer since '88. So I came in with pre-knowledge of software, and I started doing really well. So I stayed there for 7 years, and after I quit Fear '93, I was able to work for Sam Ash full time. And I finally had a 401k, I had vacations, I had full health benefits, and things I'd never had. I was like, well, this is kind of cool for a little while. So I did that till I built up enough clients in New York and had my Pro Tools system, and I quit there in '93. And that allowed me to have full time to do what I wanted to do. And I didn't know, I was studying digital audio, and I just really hadn't played. I quit Fear '93 and didn't play it for 2 years, which I hadn't done ever. I had stopped playing my craft, but I was kind of bummed out. It's like 15 years of investment in Fear, and have that end kind of killed my interest in my own craft. But in '95, Dick Dale called me, and he's a friend of a friend, and he calls me and he says, I'm going to be on the East Coast coming up in about 2-3 weeks. I've got a tour, and I need a tour drummer. And I couldn't say no to Dick Dale. And I said, okay, what are the songs? And he says, I'll send you the CDs with just check marks on all the ones I need you to learn. So I said, okay. So I immediately booked studio time at a Carroll rehearsal studio where my buddy worked. And every day for 2 hours, I studied his CDs for an hour, and then I did my exercises for an hour, or vice versa. And within 2 weeks, my chops totally came back. And those are things my testimony I'll tell my students, because you can get in shape quick if you need to for any project or any audition or whatever. I know how to do it. But then I started playing drums again. It was like Dick really found my drumming fascinating and called me the best drummer in the world. Maybe he told that to all his drummers, but he did tell me that in front of people. And now I'm sort of reinvigorated. So this is '95, and the music that I'm listening to is not punk at all. It's what, at the time, it was jungle. It was called, it wasn't drum and bass, it was just ambient music. Went from ambient to jungle, which is kind of these structured progressions, except with incredibly fast drum beats under them. That fascinated me. And there's people like Boimerang, Kruger and Dorfmeister, Aphex Twins. There's people that I started being familiar with, a genre that I hadn't been aware of. So I totally dove in, and I started writing in that style. And I released a 12-inch of that album, or one of the songs called Papi Chulo. And that project was Soli, S-O-L-I. And my wife at the time, I was having her sing. She's a cellist, so she's a natural musician. And I had her singing through a vocoder to make it sound more electronic. And then I was more prone to writing pop styles. That's kind of my upbringing. So I was kind of trying to integrate pop elements into jungle. So that project lasted till I moved here, really, and that marriage ended too. But it kind of took my interest in a new genre that I could sink my teeth into. As I had, when I first heard reggae, for instance, in the late '70s, it fascinated me because it was backwards and upside down and all these gaps, and fascinated me. I had to learn it. And then by the mid-'80s, I discovered Caribbean music, compa, zouk later on, and all these Haitian African things. My friend C.C. Smith is kind of who we met Flea through, had a show in Los Angeles called The Reggae Beat. She worked on the reggae beat, but her show is the African beat, and I loved her show, so I volunteered to work for her, and she just turned me on to all this African music, and I still use some of those beats. And I joined a band called Kwashi, I forget Kwashi's band name, but I joined a band in Los Angeles playing, all I was allowed to do is do-do, 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 do-do. But I watched everything that's going on, these guys from Senegal, and I learned a lot. So I've done that quite a bit, where I just study a genre, and it may overlap with other things. But that sort of took me through the 90s, discovering jungle, which eventually became drum and bass, totally captivated me, and I wanted to play it live. So I was one of the few people playing it live for quite a while. I played at Izzy Bar in the C-Note, pretty much Izzy Bar every Wednesday in New York while I was living there for a while. And had little good crowds, a small club, like 80 people. So I did that pretty much weekly until I was about to release a record. I got a deal from Shadow Records, and then 9/11 hit, and Shadow Records reneged on everything. They just pulled roots. I think they became a knitting factory. But so that contract sort of went out the window, and I had a record finished. So at that point, one of the jingle houses that I'd done work for, I'd done TV or radio commercials and TV commercials for, was interested in releasing it themselves in 2002. So right around that period of time, Michael Bay was doing a commercial for Victoria's Secrets. This is, so the winter of 2002 is, I was getting my record released in spite of not being able to release it through Shadow. Bang Records, Bang Music was going to release it. So right at that time, they were working with Michael Bay, who had a commercial with Giselle from Victoria's Secrets, and they couldn't find a composer for him. And they had like nearly 60 pieces, 59 pieces submitted to his commercial, original music that he turned down. He didn't like any of them. And I knew John, who was the dub guy at Bang Music at the time, and he's telling me about this. I'm thinking of one of my things off my record, Leap Before You Look, that's kind of like an altered states, is what I was thinking, like slamming like a background cymbal, a slap, then a slap. It was kind of like the altered states where William Hurt's in the hallway, is what I'm thinking when I'm writing this. So I thought, play him this little clip. So he played it for him, and I just had gone to Europe to do a little tour behind my record. So they called me in Germany, and they said, congratulations, Michael Bay likes your music. So that became a good chunk of money, and then he used it again in 2006 when they released the same commercial. So that kind of put me on the map in a lot of ways in New York City. I became, Apple would ask me to do seminars, and my clientele built to where I had like 40 people I was teaching music software to. And then I met this woman, Patty Stroder, who's an Emmy winner, and Steve Jobs had given her my number. It was the weirdest thing. One of my buddies, Scott, was working at the Apple Soho store, and this woman, Patty Stroder, had come in and bought a whole Mac system and Logic, who Apple had just bought the Logic software I use. And so she called the general manager, and she says, who in New York City teaches this software? He's like, I don't know. So she got a hold of Steve Jobs with her credentials, and Steve Jobs says, call Steve Kano again and tell him he's better yet, I'm going to call Steve Kano. So Patty's figuring like, okay, I don't know what's going on. So Steve Kano gets a call from Steve Jobs himself. He's the GM at the Apple Soho store, and says, who's the best Logic teacher in New York City? So he's like, I don't know, I'll find out. So he had a meeting with all his staff, and he asked the question. My buddy Scott raises his hand. He goes, well, I know my friend Tim Leitch teaches it. So I get a call from this woman, and I worked with her for, up till, I don't know, probably worked 10 years for her, ghosting under her. A lot of TV documentaries. But it was kind of a cool thing. Steve Jobs recommended me for the job. And that's about the same time I left Los Angeles in 92. Digital was becoming, since 82, CDs were out, digital was becoming more and more prominent. But there was a lot of resistance amongst analog 2-inch people who claimed, it was cold, and they were resistant to it, mainly the cold argument. But growing up with tape and knowing not to push those highs because on tape you get hiss, but just getting accustomed to not such a bright, your mix doesn't have to go off the charts, in the treble. I found early on the cold argument didn't work if you just attenuate those, you bring down those highs, and you still use tube. So all these old school guys who were using the LA2As and Universal Audio stuff, all the Telefunken, all the awesome tube stuff I grew up with that just makes a bass sound golden. You put it in an LA2A or a vocal. I totally love tube, but they were using this argument that digital was cold and inconvenient, and I thought just the opposite going into it. I was finally free of that noisy, hot tape machine in the room, waiting for rewind, waiting for fast forward, having to, all the things, biasing the machine, all the things that you had to do to maintain a 24 track. I was free of. I thought it was great. But still people were like, listen how cold this mix is. And it's like, well, use your ears, take those highs off and bring them back. Don't start there, bring them. So using tubes and bringing down those highs to begin with, I had no problem getting nice warm sounds. And even if they do have cold things, as it translated to vinyl, which kind of was a dying art for a while there, the phono preamp warmed it back up. So now I'm seeing that is like the resurgence in vinyl interest is that same argument. It's that same CDs are cold, and it's like CDs can reproduce more highs than you can even hear, and lows for that matter. But you've got to truncate it and say, okay, my ear, when I master, I don't go beneath a certain frequency, 20K. I don't go beneath that, or 20 hertz rather. And you don't hear up at 20K. It's like dog whistle stuff. So I'm working in this range when I'm going to vinyl. Therefore, you put the record on, the phono brings out that warmth on the bottom that the tape guys say you're losing in digital. So I work in a digital world, but I'll either go to tape to add some natural compression if I want, or I use tubes, or I just use my ears. But that's the argument. And there's so many people that didn't want to make the leap to digital audio, and the few people that did make the leap didn't want to share it. So I felt that was that odd position I felt, because I grew up since I was in high school in the recording studio. My older brother was being produced in the studio that a lot of the Toto and Earth, Wind & Fire, Boss Skaggs was being cut, Davlin at the time in Los Angeles, in the Valley actually. So I grew up all the downtime. I was there with one of my buddies who worked there as a carpenter, and we just get free studio time. We had a Bosendorfer piano and Studer 24 track and Trident B console. So I cut my teeth on tape. So I totally appreciate analog gear and analog sound. I have much respect for it. However, the digital audio is there's so much less maintenance, and there's so much the storability, not having to have a tape where you have to bake it, because it's been sitting for so long. And I appreciate things. I like mixing bands that are cut on 2-inch and then transferred to 96K. And this More Beer record I just remixed was cut on 2-inch, but we baked the tapes, transferred it to 96K digital audio, and I'm at home. And it's so nice just to have unlimited plays. As tape, there's a finite amount of times you can play a tape without it just wearing off, and then you're pushing up the faders to get tons of hiss. That's gone. So all those things, is like I'm happy to argue with anyone about it, but the end result is, if the frequency's there, you can mask it. If it's not there, you bring it up, and that's why Dolby came about, because you go to push those highs from tape wear, and now I got hiss. So they created Dolby to kill the hiss. And it's like, free a Dolby, don't need that anymore. So I'm a advocate for digital audio, and I love it. To fix a flat and sharp note, to fix a later early note without punching in, isn't cheating. We used to cut tape to do that before. We actually cut the physical tape to fix things just to be free of that, to do it on screen and be able to undo it if you blow it is just awesome. The More Beer record was something long time coming. I really wanted to remix that for decades. I mixed it in '85, like I said, in 2 hours. So I was really happy to get it, and especially in digital format, and be able to work on it at home. And but it's not something I'm new to. It's like I mix a lot of things for people in my own projects and remote bands. I'll go out to people's rehearsal studio and record them in their comfortable environment and have them cut the things as they wrote it in the environment they wrote it and get really good results. So I do some local band projects, but teaching has been really my main income for the last like 14 years, and teaching pre-COVID up to 6 days a week. Post-COVID, I really took it down to about 5 people because I wanted people to be able to do it when they can do it, but also leave an hour or so in between the students with my air purifiers going and just, safety in mind. So, however, there's a few of my students who were interested, being I wasn't really giving in person to those people, they were still interested, some of my high-level students, on getting new beats and new exercises. So that sort of motivated me to continue what I was doing anyways. So I never stopped doing that. So even through COVID, unless I was on tour or unless I was out of town, which has only been once, I've been writing a new beat or exercise every week or so. So those exercises I come up with, and I'll listen, maybe an African beat, and I'll extract the beat out of it, or some Brazilian drum line, and I can kind of figure out what the main message is being told in the beat and figure out how to translate it to drum kit. So each one of those that I'm doing once a week will be in my next book. I've got a book that came out in 2018, Diffusion of Useful Beats, that has about 50 or so my exercises and beats in it. And those are like some of my modified exercises from drum corps. Drum corps is one drum as opposed to my modifications, which is the whole kit. So I did that, kind of an accumulation of 13 years of being a drum teacher. Just took all my beats, and I put 5 Fear tunes in there too. I transcribed 5 Fear songs to put that in there as well. But my next book will have, since a year from now, since January, since I've been, every week I've been writing a new beat for my students. But that also gives me material for my new book, which I'm excited about, because the new beats are not so much drawn from the background of 14 years and then accumulated within a year's period of time. It took me about a year to put that book together. These exercises are all new, so I'm really excited about that. Another work I do, I master. Larry Boothroyd has some projects. He works bass player for Jello, Biafra. Local band Nazarod is writing material. However difficult that may be, we're still writing stuff. We were practicing up till when it started. The weather got bad. We were out on a patio 10 feet apart. So that'll resume probably when the weather gets better. And that's one of my most exciting projects, because it's a band where we all contribute and all manicure each other's suggestions until we get something we all agree on. And that's super high energy and very proggy, very odd time signatures, not for the sake of odd time signatures. It's just that's accepted, and I can play those very smoothly. And everyone in the band thinks like that too. They're very, very, very good musicians. So that's really an exciting project. There's some talk of some more material. Cheech and Chong just asked Fear to do a couple songs, which I did the drum parts for and just sent them off to Los Angeles. So we'll see if those songs get finished. We'll need bass and drums, or bass and guitar and vocals on those. I sent my drum tracks down though, and as they overdub those things, I'll get them back and I'll be able to mix those. So that's an active project. Guitarist of Fear has some new riffs that I think are awesome, that I'd love to sink my teeth into. So those are kind of hard to do though, being Lee's in Los Angeles, Philo from Fear is in Connecticut, bass player is in Massachusetts, I think. The other guitarist is in Los Angeles as well. So everyone, and the manager's in Idaho. So it's something that kind of takes some planning. Whereas when we all lived in the Valley in Los Angeles, we got together 5 nights a week. Sometimes it was just to drink beer and smoke weed, but we got together just on a regular basis. So that's kind of my future, and whatever I need to do in the meantime, I'm not afraid to do any job. I know what I am, and I put that same intensity into whatever it is. If I'm sweeping a floor, I'm the best sweeping floor person there is. So that's kind of my ethic, is whatever I do, that's what I need to do. And to up and comers, to people that are like interested in playing any higher energy music, don't take the easy way out. You take the easy way out, you're going to come to that point again sometime in the future. So just nail it. And if you're investing time in practicing, if it's 10 minutes a day, it's your craft. And it's like nobody gets good without practicing, no matter what they may say. I think Eddie Van Halen says he never practices, which wasn't true at all. And Isaac Perlman says he plays something 300 times before he'll perform it. So don't be afraid of playing something 300 times. If you're a drummer, especially, if you're a drummer, I totally encourage you to force yourself to use your left hand. Take your beats that you're used to playing normally and switch them around. And it sounds horrible at first, but do it. It doesn't take that long for it to catch up a little bit. And that strengthens you. That's what I'm saying about not taking the easy way out. And if it's your instrument, play your downstrokes, and it hurts, yeah. But those are kind of the punk kind of rules to bring you up to where I think if I go see you and I see you going chinka, 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 if you're a singer, it's hard sometimes, so obviously to do downstrokes. But when you can, if I'm looking at a bass player or a guitarist and she's playing downstrokes, then I have total respect, because that's hard. And it's hard for a drummer to come out of his comfort zone and just, and play something what he may think is difficult because it's uncomfortable, but that uncomfortable becomes comfortable. And that brings the quality of all music up, just not taking the easy way out. And you can spot it. After you get to a level of precision yourself, you don't want to ever lose it. It feels so good. And then when you see other people, you know that they're just not working that hard. And it's just a dedication. I don't mean you have to practice hours a day, although that would be good. Just not taking the easy way. When you're doing it. When you're not smoking weed at a performance or drinking beer at a performance. Save that. Wait till after your gig, then have your smoke and your beer. But saving that sort of thing is like telling yourself, I'm giving everything I got to this, and I'm an entertainer, so I want everyone to be entertained, and I know they're going to enjoy it if I'm giving 100%, 200% of everything that I have. And that starts from when you first write the thing, when you're first writing your beat. Don't stop at the first variation. Just try some new variations. Go a little bit farther. Make it a little harder on yourself. And maybe you go back to the easy thing, but people settle too soon. They get an idea, and that's rampant in today's pop music. You hear it, it's like, okay, this sounds like the first version. This sounds like elementary school to me. Whereas the ones that went one step further, maybe they took something really basic and they just shifted one note over. And for me, it's like to be clever and uncommon in 3 things is the most important rules. Being uncommon in melody, uncommon in harmony, and uncommon in rhythm. And if you're not uncommon in any one of those, you're boring. Well, I think a lot of musicians start out with kind of a rosy look forward of how they're going to be so successful and never polish their cymbals. They're going to have people that will do that. And eventually you grow up and you realize, okay, there's about this many people trying to get through a door this big, and you've got to stand out. So that's what I was saying about don't take the easy way out, and you'll stand out. Do something uncommon, and you'll stand out. So those are the things that will help you get through that little door. However, most people don't make it through the door. So if you're not doing it for the love of doing it, maybe find another job to support it. And I met so many people, like on the set I'm working on now, that are musicians that have so much love for playing drums. They'll show me their little drum kits or their what they're working on, and this enthusiasm never goes away, even if you're getting another source of income. But you've got to be resourceful. You've got to be Renaissance man or girl to survive. There's been times where I've been making really good money, totally surviving on my music income, and then other times, boop, the bottom drops out. I can't move into my mom's basement, and you've got to be resourceful. So it's having that love and knowing what it feels like to play, and the joy, the meditation of having an instrument and playing it like any artist. And when you're engaged in your work and your craft, you are there and you're nowhere else. And that's the joy of it. And that never goes away, regardless of what level you're at. And that's the joy for somebody that's just rocking blues all day long to someone that's writing a string quartet. It's that meditation, that form of meditation where you're lost in your work, like reading a good book or something. You are there. And that's the joy, and that never goes away. So that's really what you look for, because that's the most rewarding part of this. It's not always money. It's not always, that's not the pat on your back you always get. And when it happens, it's nice. But if the real joy is for that thing I'm talking about, that it's like when three musicians get together and jam, there's like a fourth thing in the room. It's like all three of them are spinning one of those Chinese plates, and they're all holding it up. It's like not about the three of us. It's about that. It's about that plate. And that's really the joy of it. That's what music and art is, I think, is the sense of creating that thing that's not me, but it's like I'm giving it, and it's like it's temporarily there. And that's what you do it for. And if you make money at it, awesome. But you can't get lost, I think, in the ego part of it, and the star ego or the spirit ego part of it, because then you're moving away from now. Now you're looking at the present or the past and the future. And whereas the real joy of it, at least for me, is I can jam with anyone, beginner, advanced, whatever. There's a joy in my craft. And whether it's setting an example for young musicians or being appreciated by senior vets, it's all the same. And everyone, I think, and that was something I was talking about with John. It's like he can just turn off all that stardom when he's behind a drum kit, just jamming out a Buddy Miles tune. He's not John Belushi anymore. He's just a musician. He's just one of the guys in the room. That's the joy. There's no ego about it. It's just giving this thing that's not me and it's not you, it's us. And that's what I do it for and encourage it. And especially in females too. There's so many female students and rockers that have been discouraged by their husbands or their parents or by their neighbors or whatever not to play, especially drums, which I teach. There's a lot of girls and women who finally I got rid of that dude and I want to play drums, or I moved out of the house and now my father can't tell me what to do. That is like, if you've got something that's burning, if you find yourself tapping your foot all the time, you're probably a little drummer in you. Or if you're listening to, bass lines, there's probably a little bass player in you. If you find yourself singing in the car, maybe there's some singer in you. And that's part of all of us. But that's really what it's about. It's not about being in front of 20,000 people. It's really about doing this thing or sharing this thing amongst the musicians in the room. And you don't get that when you overdub, or you don't get that as a one-man band. You're missing that. It doesn't have that life, that breath, as when people in the room are psychically connected. And it is a psychic connection. You don't see it. It's there, but you're all connected by the gut. You're feeling this, ooh, that doesn't feel right. Let's fix that. Oh, that's better. That's what I'm talking about. And that's the joy of it. That's really what you go for. And other people will respond in a positive way to that too, and it'll make you successful. People will come along for the ride. I think that's why Michael Bay liked my music. I didn't write it for him. I wrote it for me. And he found it perfect for what he was doing. It was expressing what he wanted to do, but I didn't write it for him. I wrote it for me. And so I think you can't be so self-indulgent that you get fingernails on the chalkboard. You have to, you're playing for an audience and you are an entertainer. So just don't forget that. Leave room for the listener. Don't hog up all the rooms, like blowing cigarette smoke in a room. It's like leave some room so other people can breathe. Don't have to fill every single note. But it's the encouragement I give all musicians at all levels is don't take the easy way out, and you'll appreciate it. You'll see the results way more quickly.